Hey guys, today we're going to be looking at CentOS Stream 10. So that's what I have installed right here on this GNOME, as a nice GNOME desktop. And basically, real quick, let's talk about, well, before we talk about what CentOS is, I want to mention the installation. The install, it gives you the option to choose different profiles or software packages. Basically, I went with a graphical server install. If you're really installing this for a server, you're probably going to want a headless install with no desktop at all, pure text-based. And if you're going for a workstation install, this is actually totally fine, but you might want to choose the workstation install. It's going to give you more stuff like Office programs and stuff like that, although you could install those separately if you want to. But basically, this is graphical, but it's more trimmed down for servers. There are a bunch of other options, and you can pick and choose what software packages and stuff you want installed during installation time. So that's nice and convenient. Basically, the same as rhel or Rocky Linux or Alma Linux. Now, real quick, what CentOS and CentOS Stream is. Basically, Red Hat is required to make their source. It is required to provide their sources because they're using the Linux kernel, and the Linux kernel, that's open source, and they have some licensing that says, hey, if you build an OS based on the Linux kernel, you also have to make your source code open source. So Red Hat's required to make their source code open source, so anyone can basically take their source and recompile Red Hat and make a Red Hat clone, and they're allowed to do that. So that's what CentOS was originally. CentOS was basically a free open Red Hat clone. Only thing is, Red Hat basically took over CentOS, and then eventually they killed off regular CentOS and created a new thing called CentOS Stream. CentOS Stream is not an exact clone of Red Hat or rhel. It's actually it includes packages a little bit ahead of time, so it isn't quite as stable. It's going to include some newer packages that will be showing up in rhel in the future. This is like a future, you could think of this as like a future snapshot of what will be in rhel. So it's not exactly identical, so it doesn't provide you the same value as rhel. I personally think it kind of fits in between Fedora and rhel, right? So that's what CentOS Stream is. Almost honestly, I think there's almost no reason for this distro to exist in the first place. And it's interesting. I could see wanting to use it if you don't want to deal with Alma Linux or Rocky Linux, although there's nothing wrong with them. You want something ever so slightly newer, but don't want to have something that's not so stable like Fedora. Maybe you might want to go with CentOS. So this is more like way more stable than Fedora, not quite as stable as rhel, Alma, or Rocky Linux. So it kind of has a place, but not that much. This is probably the least interesting Linux distro that I'm going to be reviewing here. So yeah, just kind of wanted to talk about what this is and, what you might use it for, what your use case is. Great for servers if you want something that's close in compatibility, but maybe ever so slightly newer, right? Anyways, that's what CentOS is. That's what CentOS and CentOS Stream is. There was a point for regular CentOS to exist. CentOS Stream, almost no point for it to exist, in my opinion. But yeah, that's debatable. But anyways, let's jump in here and take a look at what we have. Now that we've talked about what CentOS is, let's start reviewing this OS and just talk about it, right? So we've got a standard GNOME desktop on Wayland. You could probably go in there and select X11 if you wanted to. But yeah, we have GNOME on Wayland using Mutter as the window manager and using GDM as our display manager. Now, you see here, standard stuff. You don't have a ton of software installed by default because we're using the graphical server install, so it's not going to have like lots of Office programs and stuff. Still has some basic utilities like a disk usage analyzer and the GNOME disk stool. Really nice to have. So if you want to run a server and you just want something convenient, a nice convenient GUI on your server because you just prefer using GUIs, that's totally valid, and you have that right here. You could also use this as a workstation. You can install all the software you want to run this as a workstation. You want to run like DaVinci Resolve or whatever else, you can do that on here. So anyways, yeah, it comes with like the GNOME Software Center here, and some other stuff. It comes with Firefox by default, the default GNOME file manager here, and the GNOME text editor here, standard stuff. So that's all fine and great. Let's take a look here at how the disk is laid out and some other stuff. But before anything, I'm actually going to want to take a look at RAM usage before I actually do anything on this host. I have installed NeoFetch. It's basically just using a package to copy a script over, so it doesn't use up any resources. But I wanted to show you RAM usage. So let's run free-h, and okay, actually, you know what? I should make that bigger. And actually, I should point out, so far, the only real difference I noticed between this and Alma Linux is the wallpaper, right? The wallpaper is different. The installer looked almost basically identical, gives you basically an almost identical GNOME desktop. The wallpaper is different. It only gives you one wallpaper. Oh, I also switched this from light mode to a dark mode theme before starting this video. So that pretty much standard, straightforward. You go into here, light mode, dark mode, right? Standard, straightforward GNOME stuff, right? So anyways, memory usage, 1.3 gigs used. Same thing as Alma Linux. Out of 32, you have 29 gigs free. We're using a gig for buffering and caching, 29 gig available. Anyways, that's our RAM usage. Pretty reasonable, right? So let's check our disk layout. So let's clear this and let's go lsblk to look at our block devices. So this is the USB disk that I used to install the system. You can ignore that. This is our main hard disk or our SSD that we have this installed on. So we have SDA1, that's our EFI partition. Then we have our boot partition. We have this other partition here, which is split up using LVM, which is a pretty standard for a Red Hat based system. You have root, swap, 16 gigs of swap, and a home partition. Pretty standard stuff. That's pretty reasonable. I basically blew away all existing partitions and let it use the default partitioning scheme, and this is what we got, right? So let's take a look at df-h, and you can see all our file systems here. For root, we are using, we have 65 gigs available on this particular disk, and we are using 5.3 gigs of disk space. So there you go. And boot, nothing special there. Boot EFI, nothing special there. That's basically all we're going to look at there. Let's take a look at our FS tab at C. You know what? Let's clear this first and look at our FS tab. So yeah, identifying disks by UUID. Basically every distro is doing that, and that's probably the right way to do it. So in case a disk gets renamed, it's still going to map out the same way. You got your root, boot, home, and swap all identified here. We're using XFS, which is kind of surprising. I would have figured, I mean, there are reasons to use it, but I would have figured ext4 would still be standard, but I guess not. And I know on newer things like Fedora, it's using BTRFS these days. And same deal with SUSE. With SUSE Tumbleweed when I tested that. So yeah, newer cutting edge things are going to be using BTRFS, more popular file system. Extension 4 would be a very standard file system, and I guess XFS these days is the standard for CentOS and I guess for rhel and Alma and Rocky Linux, right? So that's what you can expect there. So XFS instead of ext4. So let's take a look at here. The next thing, let's just take a look at the kernel. So we have a 6.12.0-89, and then there's like the version Enterprise Linux 10 x86-64. That's the kernel we have. So nothing too exciting there. Relatively recent kernel. Nothing too old. So let's take a look at our Etsy issue file. So nothing too useful in this on this distro. Same thing as with Alma. So let's take a look at Etsy and OS. I'm going to look at OS release first. This is generally cross distro. Has a ton of info in here, like the name, the pretty name, the version, and all this stuff. So let's take a look at Etsy Red Hat release. And right here, that's going to give us basically the distro and version that we're running, CentOS Stream Release 10. Now, since this is provided by Red Hat, I'm betting this is not a link. So it is a link. Okay, it links to CentOS Release. So there's actually a file, CentOS Release. Yeah, so that's the same thing. You can cat CentOS Release. So Yeah, that's there. And Red Hat release on a Red Hat system, you'd have Red Hat release. On CentOS, it's just a link to CentOS release. Just like on Alma Linux, you had an Alma release file, and Etsy Red Hat release was a link to that. They're doing the same thing on CentOS. So that's kind of interesting. That those files are basically, they're generally on Red Hat systems basically forever since I started looking at this file back in like 2005. Red Hat release has been there. And it's still there to this day, but you're not going to see this on, obviously, on like an Ubuntu or Debian system or something like that. So usually I'm looking at Etsy issue or Etsy OS release. Let's look at Nvidia drivers. So I have an Nvidia GPU, and it's an older one, so I need so you can use the let's look at this real quick first. ls mod rep-i NVI, so no proprietary drivers, nothing from Nvidia. But we do have NOU. We have the Nuvo driver. So this is the open source community driver. There's also an open source driver from Nvidia and a proprietary driver from Nvidia. With the I have a GTX 1080, which will not work with the open source driver from Nvidia, but it will work with the proprietary driver from Nvidia. Works great with that. So you kind of have to be aware of which driver you're installing. And you'll get better performance with those drivers than with this driver, the community open source driver, right? This one works on almost everything, and this is why it's default on most distros, but it isn't going to give you as much performance. So just something to be aware of. You might want to install the proprietary driver if you're doing something like if you're doing something that requires it. Maybe one common use case for CentOS is to run DaVinci Resolve, so you might want it for that. You might want it for computation purposes. Probably you're not going to be using CentOS for gaming. Not a great gaming distro, so yeah, not super popular, but there's still use cases where you might want NVIDIA drivers installed on here and not want to deal with the community driver right here. So just something to point out. Now, looking at so the network is going to be, let's check this, but this is going to be Network Manager. And so Network Manager is running. There's also Systemd Network D, which is commonly used on servers. Now, had we chosen a headless system, it may have used that, or it may have stuck with Network Manager. I'd like to check that out, but in this case, it makes sense for something if you have a graphical install, especially if it's a PC that might move networks. But anyways, you could use Network Manager on a server or Systemd Network D. Just something to point out. So moving along here, we have SE Linux because it's a Red Hat system, so it's using SE Linux, not AppArmor. So we can say get force, and you can see it's enforcing, right? And we also have a firewall, so sudo systemctl status firewall d, and there we go. Firewall is active and running. You can also say sudo firewall -cmd --list all, and we can see some firewall info. I'm not going to go any deeper with that, but just wanted to show you that. Let's clear this out, and also worth pointing out, we're using Pipewire on here. Yeah, Pipewire, and I'm not going to go any deeper with that. Just want to point out it is pretty standard things these days. It's modern audio infrastructure, but anyways. What else do we want to check? Multimedia support out of the box. It's not going to be supporting all the proprietary codecs out of the box. You'll have to install those yourself, which is pretty standard with this distro. And let's see what else. So this is going to, let's cover the packages installed. So not a whole lot by default, but if you chose Workstation install, you would have more packages. So you don't have Office and stuff like that installed by default. You have your basically GNOME terminal, your GNOME text editor, which has replaced gedit. Basically a calculator, a few utilities, disk usage, disks, stuff like that. Your standard file manager, and so on and so forth. Nice, beautiful looking GNOME file manager here. That's all fine and great. Nothing too exciting, standard GNOME stuff, right? And you can install whatever GNOME stuff you might want to install. You have this nice graphical software management tool right here. You can search for whatever you want to install. You can install updates to things, search for stuff, whatever packages you might need or want. Also, going to point out, since it's Red Hat system, so obviously you're using RPM packages or Red Hat package management packages. They have a package manager for RPMs called DNF. These days, DNF is in use. It replaces the older Yum. Yum was their older package manager. Now they have DNF. So, also worth mentioning, they have Flatpaks, right? So, Flatpak. So if you want to install Flatpaks, this is great if you want newer versions of packages, because basically if you're using this distro, you could use this for 10 years and they're not going to give you newer packages in RPM format unless it's like a bug fix or a security patch. They're not giving you newer stuff. So for the most part, if you want newer packages, it's great that Flatpak is available and you can get newer packages. Flatpak is a Red Hat thing being pushed by Red Hat, so it's going to be available on CentOS. So Flatpak is here, so you can list Flatpaks installed. We have none installed so far. And let's list remotes. I don't think they're going to have remotes configured. Let's see if they do. Remotes. So, all right, look at that. We do have remotes configured. So this is one difference from Alma Linux. I actually just tested out Alma Linux last night, and on Alma, they had Flatpak installed by default. The tool was there, but no remotes were configured. So here, and on Fedora, they had FlatHub and Fedora's an actual designated Fedora remote. So they had two remotes to choose from. Here we have rhel system. Yeah, we do have this remote configured here, which is kind of interesting. And let's actually take a look at this. So if you were to search for something like the GIMP, okay, it is not available. That's interesting. You should be able to find it. All right, maybe they don't have as much available by default. That doesn't seem right at all. All right, so let's see here. Sudo dnf install GIMP. We might need, all right, no match for GIMP. That is surprising. So apparently we're going to need to enable some other, unless I'm missing something, I think we would need to enable some additional repositories to be able to get the GIMP. This is one of the most standard things you might want to install on a Linux system. Pretty standard stuff. It should just be available. I don't know, maybe if I chose a workstation install, it would have added that, but it looks like it's not available. That's kind of unsettling. That is strange. I did want to show you, okay, you can choose sources, but you can only choose package. You can't choose Flatpak on here. Not a lot of choices, right? All right, image viewer, you can install, I don't know what's a good example, but so I can't really demo if you could select, you can choose the system package or a Flatpak. I don't know if there's anything where you could choose Flatpak here. So that's a little bit interesting. Might need some configuration. Not going to dig any deeper there. I didn't want to go too deep with CentOS. So I think that's everything I wanted to cover with this. So let's talk about releases. So yeah, obviously it's a point release, not a rolling release. It should have, I guess, about 10 years of support, because it's meant to match up with the corresponding version of it's meant to match up with the corresponding version of rhel. So technically, you could call, I think they technically call CentOS Stream a rolling release. It does have it does have a version number, so it's like an actual version. There's like CentOS Stream 9 and CentOS Stream 10 that correspond to the equivalent rhel version, but it does get rolling updates that track just ahead of what would be going into that version of rhel, so the corresponding version of rhel. So it's something in between. It's not as cutting edge as other rolling releases, and it's you could kind of think of it as a rolling release, but it still matches up to a point release, if that makes sense. But But yeah, that's basically what CentOS is, and this is what you get with CentOS. Honestly, I think this is probably one of the most, if not the most boring distro you could install or test, and that's basically it. That's what I wanted to show you today. So if you found this video interesting, maybe give me a thumbs up. If you have your own comments, if you think anything I said was controversial, if you like CentOS, then CentOS Stream. If you have any opinions on that, on Red Hat, how it compares with Fedora or actual real rhel, Rocky Linux, Alma Linux, all that, definitely leave a comment down below. If you prefer something else, you prefer like the Debian or Ubuntu world, maybe Arch Linux, what's your favorite Linux distro? Leave a comment down below letting us know. But that's about it for today. So definitely you're going to want to make sure you subscribe because we're doing a lot more Linux stuff. We also do a lot of other tech stuff. We do hardware, software, servers, coding, electronics, Raspberry Pis and robots, lots of other tech stuff you don't want to miss out on. So make sure you're subscribed and also hit the bell icon. But that's basically it for today. So as always, thanks for watching and we'll see you guys on that next video.